If you've been following along with all of our backyard projects, then you know we were actually supposed to be working on the surprise project under the stairs this week. Unfortunately, we ran out of supplies before we could really get started. The good news is we're planning to pick up everything we need this week, so with any luck, that'll be next weekend's project. Since we weren't quite ready for that build yet, we decided it was finally time to tackle something that's been on our to-do list for a while, the side fence along our driveway. This is a section that will eventually close off this side of the yard, give us a little more privacy, and create the area where I'm hoping to put in a garden one day. Then I can test whether or not I actually have a green thumb. Now, building a fence sounds pretty straightforward. Dig some holes, set some posts, attach some boards, and call it a day. But what nobody tells you is that most of the job is measuring. And then measuring again, and then standing back to make sure it's still right. Once the concrete is poured, there's no pretending that post wasn't supposed to go there. We had everything laid out, marking our post locations and double checking our spacing before digging the holes. Setting the posts isn't difficult in theory, but it still takes a little teamwork to get everything lined up just right. We measured, checked the spacing, and measured again before my husband poured the concrete into the holes. Once the posts were in place, I held the middle board steady while he screwed it into the post so we could keep everything straight. And then we checked the level again just to make sure nothing had shifted. At one point, my husband tossed the empty concrete bag on the ground with all the enthusiasm of a man who was very ready to be done with that part of the job. And I gave each post a little shake to make sure there weren't any gaps in the wet concrete. We also set a 2x4 in place so we could measure where the next hole needed to go. And of course, we kept glancing up at the sky because it looked like we might be getting a little weather. But we had to keep going so we wouldn't have to put everything away before we finished using the wood we already had out. Right about then, our youngest came outside with Major to see what all the commotion was about. And as expected, Major immediately decided he needed to inspect the job site. At this point, we were trying to get one of the posts perfectly straight and it was just slightly off. My husband attempted to use a 2x4 as leverage to nudge it into place. It was a good idea in theory, even though it did look like the wood was going to snap in half. But the post just wasn't interested in cooperating. So instead, he ended up having to remove the center 2x4 we already attached so we could make the adjustment properly. Sometimes the fastest way to finish a project is to undo part of the project first. While we took a quick pause, Major got some much needed water and attention. Then he wandered off to roll around in the tall grass next to the car that has been sitting there waiting to be fixed up and sold. A few minutes later, he discovered the newest post hole. And that's when it hit us. We've accidentally taught the puppy that digging giant holes in the yard is acceptable behavior. Not ideal. One minute he's curiously investigating a fence post hole. The next minute we're wondering how many craters we're going to find around the yard in a few months. But slowly we're making real progress down the fence line. My oldest daughter came out to check on how everything was going and see how much progress we'd made. Then came one of my favorite moments of the day. My husband headed off to grab the hose so we could wet down the concrete, and he got just a little too close to my camera and nearly knocked it over. We filled up the post hole and soaked the concrete so everything could set properly. At that point, we finally stepped back and looked at what we'd accomplished so far. The fence line was taking shape and the posts were standing, and we only had one small section left to finish. Of course, that last section couldn't be quite as simple. Since we're planning to add a small privacy gate there, we had to measure and cut the 2x4s to fit the shorter opening. A few more cuts, a little more adjusting, and the final post was finally going in place. Then right as we were wrapping things up, our 10-year-old casually walked through the background. The moment she realized the camera was recording, she instantly backed out of the frame like she just walked onto the wrong movie set. Anyway, if you've stuck around, thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next update.